When people think about Diary of a Wimpy Kid, they usually think about Greg Heffley, Rolly Jefferson, Roderick, Manny, and Frank Heffley. These characters have appeared throughout almost the entire series and are still around today. But if you've been reading the books for years, you've probably noticed something strange. A lot of characters who used to be important have seemingly vanished without any explanation. Some of them appeared in multiple books, played major roles in Greg's life, and even became fan favorites, only to slowly disappear as the series went on. Today we're looking at some of the biggest missing characters in Diary of a Wimpy Kid and trying to figure out what happened to them. Let's start with one of the most obvious examples, Chirag Gupta. If you read the early books, you'll probably remember Chirag instantly. He wasn't just another random classmate. He was involved in one of the most famous jokes in the entire series when Greg and the rest of the school convinced everyone to pretend that Chirag didn't exist. The joke became so popular among fans that it's still talked about today. Chirag appeared regularly in the first few books and felt like one of Greg's closest classmates outside of Rolly. Yet as the series continued, his appearances became less and less common. He would occasionally show up in the background, but eventually he became almost completely absent from the story. For a character who was once involved in one of the franchise's most iconic moments, that's a pretty surprising fate. Another character who practically disappeared is Patty Farrell. In the early books, Patty was one of Greg's biggest rivals. She was smart, followed the rules, answered every question in class, and always seemed to annoy Greg without even trying. Whenever Patty appeared, you could almost guarantee that Greg would end up frustrated. She wasn't just a background character either. Patty played a role in several memorable scenes and was one of the most recognizable students at Greg's school. But over time, Patty slowly faded into the background. New characters were introduced, different storylines took center stage, and eventually Patty stopped appearing regularly. If you started reading the newer books before the older ones, you might not even realize how important Patty used to be. Then there's Holly Hills, arguably the most famous crush in the entire series. Holly was a huge deal during the early years of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Greg spent countless pages trying to impress her, dreaming about dating her, and creating elaborate plans that almost always failed. Holly was central to some of the series' biggest storylines, especially in books like The Last Straw and Dog Days. She was one of the few characters who genuinely motivated Greg to change his behavior, even if those changes never lasted very long. Because of how important she was, many readers assumed Holly would remain a major character throughout the series. Instead, she gradually disappeared. She occasionally gets mentioned, but compared to her importance in the early books, she is almost non-existent today. Alex Aruda is another interesting example. Unlike Holly or Patty, Alex was never a major character, but he was one of those classmates who appeared often enough that fans knew exactly who he was. He helped make Greg's school feel like a real place filled with recurring students rather than just random background characters. Alex appeared in multiple books and was part of many classroom scenes, but as the series grew larger, he slowly stopped appearing. Nowadays, most readers probably wouldn't even notice that he's gone, which makes him one of the easiest characters to forget. Bryce Anderson is another character who seems to have vanished. In the early books, Bryce was known for being one of the popular kids at school, and was often connected to storylines involving popularity and social status. Greg frequently compared himself to students like Bryce and wished he could be more like them. Bryce represented the kind of popularity Greg always wanted but could never achieve. Yet despite once being a recognizable face in the school, Bryce eventually disappeared from the spotlight. And what about Fregley? While Fregley hasn't completely vanished, he's definitely nowhere near as important as he used to be. In the early books, Fregley was one of Greg's strangest classmates and was responsible for some of the funniest and weirdest moments in the series. Fans loved him because he was unpredictable and completely different from everyone else. Even though he still appears occasionally, his role has become much smaller compared to the early days of Diary of a Wimpy Kid. The Heffley family has also had its share of disappearing characters. Uncle Charlie, for example, played memorable roles in several stories but is rarely seen nowadays. Some extended family members seem to show up for a single storyline and then disappear for years at a time. This isn't unusual in long-running book series, but it's still interesting to notice how many family members have faded into the background. So why do these characters disappear in the first place? The answer is probably much simpler than most fans think. Diary of a Wimpy Kid has been running for nearly 2 decades. Over that time, Jeff Kinney has created hundreds of characters. Every new book introduces new classmates, teachers, neighbors, relatives, and rivals. Eventually, there simply isn't enough room to keep everyone involved. Some characters are created for a specific joke or storyline, and once that storyline is finished, they aren't needed anymore. Others get replaced by new characters who serve similar roles. Holly Hills, for example, was important because Greg needed a crush. Once that storyline had run its course, there wasn't much reason to keep bringing her back. Another reason is that Greg's world has changed over time. The early books focused heavily on school life and Greg's classmates. Modern books often focus more on family adventures, vacations, road trips, sports, and larger events. Because of this shift, many school characters naturally receive less attention. The cast hasn't necessarily been forgotten. There are simply fewer opportunities for them to appear. What's fascinating is that many fans remember these missing characters more clearly than some of the newer ones. That's because characters like Chirag, Patty, and Holly were involved in some of the most memorable moments in the entire franchise. Even years after their last major appearances, readers still talk about them online and wonder if they'll ever make a comeback. Will any of these characters return someday? It's certainly possible. Jeff Kinney occasionally brings back old characters for cameos or small appearances. And with so many books still being released, there's always a chance that a forgotten character could suddenly return. Imagine a future Diary of a Wimpy Kid book where Greg runs into Chirag again, gets annoyed by Patty Farrell, or somehow embarrasses himself in front of Holly Hills one more time. Longtime fans would probably love to see it. Until then, these characters remain some of the biggest mysteries in Diary of a Wimpy Kid. They were once important parts of Greg Heffley's world, helped create some of the series' funniest and most memorable moments, and then quietly disappeared into the background. Whether it's Chirag Gupta, Patty Farrell, Holly Hills, Alex Aruda, Bryce Anderson, or one of the many other forgotten faces from the early books, their absence is a reminder of just how much the Diary of a Wimpy Kid universe has changed since the series first began.